For a week now, I've been doing what I can, my small part, to educate the whole country, not just people in Red America, about Charlie Kirk. And I know you've talked about it, having a text from him the day before he was killed. As specifically as you can, could you explain to people who didn't know him why he was so important to so many people in this country? Not just the traits, but what did he do specifically that made him so exceptional for so many?
I think that when I first got to know Charlie, he was so young and he was so bold. So that always is what I think impressed people at his age. Not only was he bold and outspoken, but he also was incredibly knowledgeable. His love for this country and his love for our history and the rights that we have as individuals was inspiring. I know it was to me personally. And then the fact that he went places that other politicians and other people involved in government didn't necessarily go. From the time I was growing up, I was taught that you can learn something from everybody, that even if somebody was criticizing you or had a differing opinion, that you still needed to listen and to spend time with individuals and talking. And that's exactly what Charlie did. You don't see that in politics that often, but Charlie went and talked to people who disagreed with him and then did his homework, knew the knowledge behind the facts that he was speaking. And that was super impressive. He was a friend of mine. And not only the larger his organization got and his movement got, he still kept that personal touch by texting people, calling them. And that was incredibly special. So I think that's why this rests so heavy on people, is because he was still Charlie. Over the years, no matter how big Turning Point got or how many people he got to know or how important he was to the president, the most powerful person in the free world, he was still Charlie, and everybody felt like they knew him.
What would be, for you, a fitting way to commemorate his life and to allow his legacy to live on? What are some of the things you'd like to see Turning Point do, the country do, to make sure that his commitment to public service is realized even now that he's gone?
I remember when my dad passed away, I think one of the greatest fears that I had was that people would forget him. It helped when people told me stories about him, when they told me about his life and how they knew him. So I think continuing to tell Charlie's story is incredibly important. And for us to continue to reflect on what he stood for and his boldness. So praying and supporting his family is something that we shouldn't be doing just in the short term here. We should continue and commit to them that we'll walk alongside them in the years ahead, and that these little kids and kiddos of theirs will be supported and loved, but also that we will continue supporting Turning Point and what they're doing and focusing on educating our next generation of Americans and how special it is to live in this country.
I've been a student of your department since 9/11, when really one of the great legislative achievements, I think, in the modern era, where members of Congress and both parties and the president came together to say, we have too many departments, too many agencies spread out that really are part of Homeland Security, including the Secret Service, which younger people may not remember or know, used to be part of the Treasury Department. It made no sense. You now have a lot of the agencies committed to Homeland Security under your department. So I want to ask you about what lessons you draw. We try to balance civil liberties and national security in this country. We also try to balance people like Charlie or you or members of Congress and governors, you were governor, access to the people. You don't want to have people all behind glass and in bulletproof vehicles. You want some interaction. So I still don't have a good explanation of how he did have security that day. It obviously wasn't up to the task, not to blame people, but just to ask the question. Your responsibility includes figuring out how to protect people in this country who are leaders. What lessons are you thinking about? What concerns do you have in the wake of apparently one young man, not a professional killer, able to do this? What lessons do you draw? What things are you thinking about from that horrible day?
Yeah, I would say from this incident, we are evaluating it and looking at what more could have been done, what more we can do to help support college campuses when they're having events like this, what we can do to help train individuals. We had Department of Homeland Security employees from 4 different states respond to that incident that day and be there and help with the investigation. And that is our job so many times. The mission of the Department of Homeland Security is to secure the homeland, and the authorities that we have under the 23 components touch every single person that lives in this country. If they're coming in or leaving, every single product or good in this country that would come in or leave, and also anything on the internet, what is said or sold or done or communicated. So the authorities that this department has are very far reaching, and it is a national security agency. So giving that kind of insight and wisdom to folks on the ground there that we may have and what we may learn from this, and then helping to train and support that kind of security measures is what we do. And so we are learning more and more, and it's not our job necessarily to always fill in every single security apparatus for every single event that is conducted, but we do have a responsibility to be there and to do what we can to provide a more secure environment in the future.
Yeah, no doubt you're not in charge of private security, and you can't be, but we don't want to live in a society where we can't have people like Charlie doing. He was extraordinarily open. The whole point of these events was to be open to people. Sunday in Arizona, we're going to have many senior people in the government and 60,000 souls inside a football stadium. How does something like that now, again, in light of what happened, how does something like that get protected so people can enter and not wait in line for 3 hours and not miss the event?
Yeah, we have declared this. The Department of Homeland Security has declared that event on Sunday, the celebration of Charlie's life, as a national security event. It's a SEER 1 event, which means we deploy more resources there. We've got virtually all of our different components have a role, as well as coordinating with state officials and law enforcement and local officials as well, to make sure that that event is secure. So it is elevated to the highest level because the President of the United States will be there, the Vice President, a lot of the cabinet members, and many, many governors and leaders, and thousands of people. So we are doing due diligence to make sure that we're as prepared as possible for that event, but also knowing that this is a dynamic that we haven't seen for a while.
Yeah. Getting control of the southern border is obviously for not just experts, but for many citizens is, table stakes to say protecting the homeland. You can't have a porous border and allow people to come in, not just Latin American immigrants, but people from all over the world, including potentially terrorists. This is still an extremely open country. And since 9/11, people have said, what's to keep someone from walking into a mall in Nebraska or South Dakota with an explosive device? We're such an open country. Are we open to or vulnerable to another 9/11 type attack, a mass attack on the homeland? Or have we learned so much and spent so much that we're now much safer than we were on September 11th, 2001?
Well, every day we get up and focus on making sure that we're anticipating as much as possible and prepared for a situation like that. I do believe we're safer than we were on 9/11 so many years ago, 24 years ago, but we always have more that we can do and more we can learn and more that we can work together and cooperate. So, that open border allowed an invasion of individuals into our country where there was hundreds and hundreds of known and suspected terrorists that were allowed to come directly into this country, that we had cartel members and gangs that are extremely dangerous that were allowed to come in and ignore our federal laws. So we are doing the work to remove these individuals, the worst of the worst. But at the same time, we know that every day they were here, they were recruiting more and more members. They were not just proliferating violent crimes on our people and our citizens, but they also were out there, doing damage to our communities because of those crimes and making people feel less safe. And we work every day to allow these communities to get these individuals to consequences, to justice, get them out of our country so that people can experience what it's like to be free again, to walk their kids to school, to go to their jobs and not have to worry about being victimized, murdered, raped, or have their children trafficked, or drugs taking out their kids. That's our job, is to make sure that while we had those 4 years of open borders, those thousands of individuals that came in that have been detrimental to the safety of our communities are brought to bear and brought to consequences.
Your job, your department's so immense, but a lot of the public facing stuff you've done involves going into urban areas with your teams and dealing with the arrest and then in many cases deportation of people who've come to this country illegally, in many cases who've also committed other crimes. Is that serving as a deterrent for people to voluntarily self-deport before you find them? Do we have any sense of whether that's happening in significant numbers?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that by us being so aggressive and the president being so clear that he's going to enforce the law and that there's going to be consequences and that we're going to get these dangerous criminals off our streets, that has sent a clear message. It's sent a clear message to everyone that the boss has changed. There's somebody new in the White House that's very different than the last president. And this president cares about safety and security. And we have had hundreds of thousands of people that have woken up and have decided to go home on their own. In fact, the last number that was reported was 1.6 million people have voluntarily left this country since President Trump has been in office. And if you add that to the number of people that we've deported, almost 2 million people have left this country that were here illegally. And that is something that, as I've traveled to Central and Southern American countries and talked to their leaders and their presidents and the numbers that they've given us, that they have helped us with that communication message. I think, Mark, you've probably seen the commercials that we've run across this country, but also in other countries that have said, you know, if you don't, if you're in this country illegally, and if you don't leave on your own, that if you wait until we have to deport you, you may never get the chance to come back to the United States of America. And people overwhelmingly have listened to that message, recognized that they will go home on their own. And so they have the opportunity to maybe come back the right way someday, rather than to wait until we deport them.
Attention, everybody 64 years or older. This is an important announcement. The Department of Justice recently sued 3 major Medicare brokers for claiming they were unbiased while allegedly pushing people into plans that got them the biggest kickbacks. It's true, so many insurance agents, they can't be trusted, but you can't necessarily rely on government resources either. So what to do? Here's what I recommend. I want to tell you about a group called Chapter. Chapter was started by people who went through this experience personally after their own parents were pushed into the wrong Medicare program by an agent who was more focused on commissions than on good care. Chapter has a very simple mission. They want to give every American the honest, straightforward Medicare advice that they need and that they deserve. And here's what makes them different. They're the only Medicare advisor that compares every plan across the country, not just a handful. That saves their clients an average of $1,100 a year. There's really no reason not to call. It's quick, it's easy, and they can review your options in less than 20 minutes. If you're already in the right plan, they'll tell you that. But if there's a better plan, they'll help you make the switch. This could be the most important call you make this year. Dial pound 250 and say Chapter Medicare to get peace of mind. Again, that's pound 250 and say the words Chapter Medicare.